Daniel had learned, in the 3 years since his wife's passing, that the world could turn sharp without warning. Grief had carved something deeper into him. Not bitterness, but awareness. So when he walked through Manhattan at dusk with his 8-year-old daughter Emma's hand tucked safely in his, he noticed everything. The flicker of impatience in strangers' faces, the way traffic lights reflected in rain-slick pavement, the subtle shifts in tone that hinted when something ordinary was about to become something else. That evening the sky was painted in bruised purples and fading gold, the city glowing with that cinematic softness that made even cracked sidewalks look poetic. Emma chattered about her spelling test, her words tumbling over each other with innocent excitement, while Daniel nodded and smiled, absorbing the simple blessing of her voice. Being a single dad had turned small moments into treasures. A warm hand in his, a story about a classroom triumph, the promise of hot chocolate waiting just a block away. They might have passed the scene entirely if not for the laughter. It cut through the street noise with a cruel edge, too loud, too deliberate. Daniel's steps slowed almost involuntarily. Near a scaffolding-wrapped building stood 3 young men, positioned not casually but strategically, forming a loose semicircle around a woman in a beige coat. She clutched her purse close to her chest as though it were armor, her posture stiff, her eyes darting toward openings that closed the moment she tried to move. One of the men leaned in too close, invading her space with a smirk that suggested entitlement. Another shifted sideways whenever she attempted to step past, blocking her path with exaggerated innocence. The third held up a phone, filming, his grin wide and gleaming as if humiliation were comedy and fear were content. Daniel felt Emma's small fingers tighten around his. She sensed it too, the imbalance, the wrongness. Around them the city performed its familiar ritual of avoidance. A man in a tailored suit glanced once and then fixed his gaze ahead. 2 women walking arm in arm lowered their voices and crossed the street. A food delivery rider slowed briefly, assessed the inconvenience of involvement, and pedaled on. The unspoken rule of urban survival hovered in the air. Mind your business. But Daniel's business had changed the day he became both mother and father. Emma looked up at him, confusion clouding her young face. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. That single word anchored him. He crouched slightly so they were eye level, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I need you to stand right here by this bakery window," he said gently, gesturing toward the warmly lit glass display of cakes and pastries just a few steps away. "Don't move. Keep your eyes on me the whole time. Okay?" She searched his face, sensing the seriousness beneath his calm, then nodded bravely. "Okay." He squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise that he would come back exactly as he was. Then he stood and walked toward the scene, not hurried, not aggressive, simply steady. The men noticed him only when he was close enough that ignoring him required effort. The woman's voice trembled as she said, "Please, just let me pass." But it sounded smaller against their laughter. Daniel stopped a few feet away, positioning himself just within the circle without breaking into it. "That's enough," he said, his voice even but carrying, like a teacher quieting a classroom. The filming stopped first. The phone lowered slightly. "Mind your business," one of the men snapped, annoyance replacing amusement. Daniel held his ground. "It became my business when she asked you to stop." There was no shouting, no chest puffing, just clarity. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward, testing boundaries. "We're just joking, man. Relax." Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to the woman's face. Pale, tense, eyes wide with something dangerously close to panic. Then back to them. "She doesn't look like she's laughing." The air shifted. It was subtle but undeniable. A few pedestrians slowed. A woman paused at the corner instead of crossing. Someone further down the block stopped pretending to scroll and actually looked up. The men sensed it too. The audience was changing. "You trying to be a hero?" another one taunted. Daniel shook his head once. "No, I'm trying to be an example." The words landed heavier than a threat would have. The tallest man stepped closer, invading Daniel's space now, but Daniel didn't move back. His posture remained relaxed, hands visible, shoulders squared but not aggressive. Years of carrying grief had taught him the strength of stillness. "Walk away," Daniel said quietly. "This ends right now." There was something in his tone, not anger, but certainty, that unsettled them. Behind him, the woman seized the small opening and shifted slightly out of the tightest part of the circle. The phone disappeared completely into a pocket. Laughter faded into awkward silence. The city noise seemed to lower its volume, as if the entire block were holding its breath. For a split second, it felt as though everything balanced on a knife's edge: ego versus accountability, cruelty versus consequence. Then someone in the gathering crowd muttered, "Yeah, leave her alone." Another voice echoed faintly, "Come on, guys." The spell broke. The young men exchanged glances, bravado dissolving under the weight of witnesses. "Crazy people," one muttered, backing away. "Can't even joke anymore." But their retreat lacked conviction. They drifted off, swallowed by the same crowd that had nearly enabled them moments earlier. Daniel waited until they were fully gone before turning to the woman. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her hands trembled visibly. "Thank you," she whispered, voice unsteady. "I didn't know what to do." Daniel offered a small, reassuring smile. "You shouldn't have had to do anything." Over her shoulder, he saw Emma still standing by the bakery window, eyes fixed on him exactly as instructed. He exhaled slowly, feeling the delayed rush of adrenaline in his veins. The street, once buzzing with detached motion, felt different now, quieter, reflective. People avoided his eyes, or met them with something that looked like respect, maybe even regret. Daniel walked back to his daughter and took her hand again, grounding himself in the warmth of her small fingers. She looked up at him with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Is she safe now?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes." Emma squeezed his hand tighter, as if sealing the moment into memory. And for a few suspended seconds before the traffic resumed its usual roar, before conversations restarted and footsteps quickened again, the entire street remained silent. Not from fear this time, but from the sudden realization that one calm voice had drawn a line none of them could pretend not to see. The silence did not break all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a held breath released in fragments, and Daniel could feel the weight of it pressing against his ribs as he stood there with Emma's hand wrapped tightly around his fingers. The young men had retreated, their laughter swallowed by the crowd, but the energy they left behind lingered in the air like static after lightning. The woman in the beige coat stood a few steps away, her shoulders trembling despite her effort to appear composed. And for a moment Daniel realized that stepping in had only been the first half of the act. What came after mattered just as much. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently, keeping his voice low so it felt private despite the growing circle of onlookers. She swallowed and nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unsteady fingers. "I think so. I didn't expect anyone to help." That confession struck harder than the confrontation itself. Daniel glanced around at the people who had slowed but not intervened, noticing how some avoided eye contact while others stared openly now, as if trying to reconcile their earlier inaction with the scene unfolding before them. Emma stepped slightly closer to the woman, her small face open and sincere. "My dad says if someone is scared, you don't walk away," she said in a soft but clear voice. A faint ripple moved through the crowd at that. Shame in some expressions, reflection in others. The woman's lips trembled into the beginnings of a grateful smile. "Your dad is very brave," she replied. Daniel felt a quiet discomfort at the word brave. He hadn't felt fearless, only unwilling to let his daughter learn that silence was acceptable currency. From somewhere down the block, the faint flicker of police lights began to glow against storefront windows, casting red and blue reflections across glass and pavement. Apparently someone had made the call after all. The sight caused murmurs among the bystanders, subtle shifts as people recalibrated their roles from passive observers to potential witnesses. One of the men who had earlier quickened his pace now stepped forward hesitantly. "I saw what happened," he said to Daniel and the woman alike. "If you need a statement." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was movement, proof that courage, once displayed, can ripple outward in unexpected ways. The woman drew a steadier breath. "Thank you," she said, this time louder, her voice regaining fragments of strength. "All of you." A young woman from the edge of the gathering added quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." That admission hung in the air heavier than any accusation. Daniel shook his head slightly. "What matters is what we do next," he said, not as a reprimand but as an invitation. Emma looked up at him, studying his face the way children do when they sense a lesson forming. The police car pulled to the curb, officers stepping out with alert but measured expressions. The crowd parted more quickly for them than it had for the woman earlier, a detail not lost on Daniel. Statements were requested, and the woman recounted the harassment with a steadiness that grew sentence by sentence, as though speaking it aloud diluted its power. Daniel confirmed what he had seen, careful, factual, calm. Emma remained pressed to his side, unusually quiet, absorbing everything. When an officer crouched slightly to ask if she was all right, she nodded solemnly. "My dad told them to stop," she explained with quiet pride. The officer gave Daniel a look that carried professional acknowledgement and something warmer beneath it. As the procedural details unfolded, Daniel became aware of a phone lifted again. Not by the harassers this time, but by someone who had captured the confrontation from a distance. "I got the whole thing," the person said, stepping forward. From when he walked up, the implication hovered. This moment would not vanish into anonymity. Could circulate, be replayed, dissected, praised, criticized. Daniel felt a flicker of unease at that thought. He hadn't acted for spectacle. He had acted because his daughter was watching. The woman noticed his expression and said softly, "If it goes online, maybe it will make someone else step in next time." He considered that, perhaps visibility, when rooted in accountability rather than humiliation, could be a force for good. The officers eventually took descriptions and assured the woman they would review nearby cameras. The crowd began to thin, conversations reigniting in subdued tones. But something fundamental had shifted. Strangers who might have brushed past each other minutes earlier now exchanged nods of recognition, as if they had shared a small, significant chapter together. Emma tugged gently at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Were those boys bad?" The question was pure, uncomplicated. Daniel crouched so he was level with her again, aware that his answer would settle into her understanding of the world. "They made a bad choice," he said carefully. "And sometimes people keep making bad choices if no one tells them to stop." She frowned thoughtfully. "So you told them?" "Yes." "Because she was alone?" He glanced at the woman, who watched the exchange with glistening eyes. "Because no one should feel alone like that," he replied. Emma nodded slowly, processing. The woman reached out impulsively and squeezed Daniel's hand. "You changed more than you know," she said. "Not just for me." He offered a small, humble smile. "We all did," he corrected gently, glancing at the bystanders who had stepped forward afterward. The last police officer returned to his car, lights dimming, the dramatic flashes replaced by ordinary street lamps. Traffic resumed its steady rhythm, taxis honking impatiently as though the city resented even brief pauses. Yet beneath the surface hum, there lingered a thread of awareness, fragile but real. Daniel stood and took Emma's hand again, feeling the familiar warmth ground him. As they began walking toward the cafe they had nearly forgotten, a few strangers offered quiet words. "Good job. That was the right thing. We need more of that." Daniel acknowledged them with polite nods, uncomfortable with praise but grateful for the shift in tone. The woman remained behind momentarily, speaking with the person who had filmed, perhaps ensuring the narrative would reflect truth rather than spectacle. Before Daniel and Emma reached the corner, she called out, "Wait!" They turned. She approached with steadier steps now, extending a small card. "If that video does go around, I want you to know I'm okay," she said. "And I want your daughter to know she witnessed something important." Daniel accepted the card but said softly, "She witnessed what should be normal." Emma looked up at both adults, her expression serious beyond her years. "We should still get hot chocolate," she declared suddenly, as if restoring balance required sweetness. The unexpected innocence of it made the woman laugh. A genuine, unshaken laugh this time. Daniel felt the tension in his chest ease. Yes, he agreed. We should. As they parted ways, the woman walking toward the subway with her head a little higher, Daniel sensed that the moment had already begun to ripple outward beyond the block. Not because of violence or drama, but because of interruption, because someone had refused to let humiliation pass as entertainment. The crowd dispersed fully now, but their earlier silence had transformed into something else, something reflective. And as Daniel and Emma stepped into the warm glow of the cafe, the bell above the door chiming softly, the city outside resumed its relentless motion. Yet for those who had witnessed it, the memory of that stillness, of that line drawn without shouting or fists, would linger long after the street forgot their names. By the time Daniel and Emma stepped back onto the sidewalk with 2 paper cups warming their hands, Manhattan had returned to its familiar rhythm, as if the city were determined to swallow the incident whole and move forward without reflection. Yet Daniel felt the difference beneath the surface, like a current running quietly under concrete. Emma walked close to him, unusually thoughtful, her earlier chatter replaced by silence that wasn't fear but processing. The sugar-sweet scent of cocoa drifted between them, grounding and ordinary, and for a moment he wondered how many turning points in life disguised themselves as small pauses between routine errands. Halfway down the block, a notification sound chimed from a stranger's phone nearby. Then another. A cluster of teenagers standing outside a convenience store were watching something intently, their expressions animated. Daniel caught only fragments as he passed. "That's him," one whispered, not unkindly. He didn't need to see the screen to understand. The video had already begun its quiet migration through the digital bloodstream of the city. He felt a flicker of discomfort. He had not stepped forward to become content. But Emma tugged his sleeve again. "Daddy?" she asked carefully. "Are we in trouble?" The innocence of the question made him kneel beside her once more. The third time that evening he had lowered himself to her height, so the world would feel less towering. "No, sweetheart," he assured her softly. "Sometimes when you do the right thing, people talk about it. That doesn't mean it was wrong." She studied his face, searching for doubt, then seemed satisfied. As they continued walking, a woman approached hesitantly, the same woman from earlier who had apologized for not speaking up. "I just saw it online," she admitted, holding up her phone briefly before lowering it. "People are already sharing it. They're saying it's what courage looks like." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Courage would have been not needing it in the first place," he replied gently. She nodded, eyes thoughtful, as if committing that sentence to memory. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered around another glowing screen, but the tone was different from the jeering earlier. This time there was no laughter edged with cruelty, only murmurs of approval and debate. "He didn't even yell," someone remarked. "He just stood there." Another voice added, "That's what made it powerful." Daniel felt the strange duality of the moment, private intention colliding with public reaction. He wondered how the young men were experiencing this same shift, whether their bravado had curdled into embarrassment as their actions replayed for thousands of unseen eyes. The thought did not bring him satisfaction, only a sober awareness of consequence. Emma sipped her drink carefully. "If those boys see the video," she asked, "will they feel bad?" Daniel considered before answering. "I hope they feel responsible," he said. "Feeling bad can fade. Responsibility stays." She nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction with the seriousness only children can manage. As they reached the subway entrance, the woman in the beige coat emerged again from the stairwell below, having apparently turned back. She approached with measured steps, holding her own phone now. "It's everywhere," she said quietly, showing Daniel the screen. The clip captured the moment he had stepped forward, his voice calm, the young men's laughter faltering, the subtle swell of the crowd's attention. The caption read, "One man refused to look away." The comments were already multiplying. Praise, arguments, reflections, confessions from strangers admitting they once stayed silent and wished they hadn't. "I wanted you to see it," she continued, "not for attention, but because it's changing the conversation." Daniel watched a few seconds, then gently handed the phone back. "If it helps someone choose differently next time," he said, "then it's worth it." She smiled, steadier now than she had been all evening. "It already has," she replied. "My sister just texted me. She said she showed it to her teenage son and told him, 'This is what respect looks like.'" Something inside Daniel tightened. Not pride, but gravity. The idea that Emma's small hand in his had been part of a larger lesson unfolding beyond this street made the night feel heavier and brighter at once. A man descending the subway stairs paused and called up, "Hey, sir!" Daniel turned. "My daughter saw the video," the man said, gesturing to a girl a few steps below him. "She asked why no one else stepped in sooner. I didn't have a good answer." Daniel met the man's eyes and responded simply, "Next time you will." It wasn't accusation. It was invitation. The woman in the beige coat reached out and squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. "You were very brave too," she said. Emma blinked in surprise. "I didn't do anything," she replied. The woman shook her head softly. "You watched, and you'll remember." Those words lingered as the train roared faintly beneath their feet, wind rushing up through the stairwell like a reminder that the city never truly rests. Daniel realized that what had happened was no longer confined to a single confrontation. It had become a mirror held up to everyone who saw it. Some would scroll past, some would argue, but some, perhaps many, would pause the next time they heard laughter with teeth. Emma slipped her hand into his again, her voice small but certain. "I'm glad you didn't walk away." Daniel looked down at her, feeling the quiet weight of fatherhood settle over him like a mantle. "So am I," he admitted. Above them, traffic lights shifted from red to green, casting changing colors across faces and pavement. The crowd dispersed once more, but this time the dispersal carried something new. A subtle awareness that silence is a choice, and choices echo. As Daniel and Emma descended into the subway, their reflections flickering in the darkened window of the arriving train, he understood that the street had not fallen silent because of fear. It had fallen silent because someone had broken the script. And once broken, scripts are hard to follow again. The train doors closed with a soft finality, carrying them forward into the ordinary continuation of their lives. Yet behind them the moment continued to ripple outward through screens and conversations and quiet internal reckonings. Somewhere, perhaps in another neighborhood, another bystander would remember the calm voice, the steady stance, the refusal to perform cruelty as entertainment. And maybe, just maybe, when faced with their own dusk-lit decision, they would step forward too, turning another stretch of pavement into a line no one dared to cross.